She forged my signature to steal millions from this court. My judge father boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls of packed courtroom 4B. 400 people, colleagues, journalists, and local elites, gasped in unison, turning their cold, judgmental eyes toward me. He stood at the podium in his ceremonial robes, holding up a set of land transfer deeds, looking like the ultimate moral authority. My stepmother squeezed his arm, wiping away fake tears of betrayal, while her golden boy son smirked at me from the front row. They thought they had finally framed me, stripped me of my late mother's legacy, and destroyed my reputation beyond repair. The judge lowered his gavel, ready to order my immediate arrest. But then, my attorney stood up, unsealed a dusty blue ribbon vault folder left behind by my late mother, and handed a single piece of evidence to the clerk. Before you find out what was inside that folder, please follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Vivian Marsh, and I am 36 years old. Standing in the middle of courtroom 4B, I could feel every eye in the building burning into my back. 400 people had crammed into the room: city officials, prominent attorneys, news reporters, and local elites, all dressed in formal attire for what was supposed to be a celebratory gala honoring my father's 40 years on the judicial bench. Instead, it had turned into a public execution of my character. My father, Judge Arthur Marsh, stood at the mahogany podium looking imposing in his ceremonial robes. His voice carried the booming, unquestionable authority that had terrified criminals for decades. But he wasn't addressing a felon. He was addressing me. He held up a stack of land transfer deeds, his knuckles white with anger as he delivered his speech with practiced dramatic precision. Beside him, my stepmother Victoria dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the heartbroken mother figure to perfection, while her son Julian leaned back in the front row with a smug, victorious grin. She forged my signature to steal millions from this court and from her own family, my father announced into the microphone. A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. The whispers started immediately. Vicious, judgment-heavy murmurings from people I had known my entire life. My father looked down at me with cold, unforgiving eyes, ready to signal his prosecutor friends to place me under immediate arrest right there on the stage. He believed he had calculated every single move, constructed the ultimate trap, and effectively erased my voice before I could ever tell the truth. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't standing there alone. To truly understand how I ended up standing in front of 400 people being branded a thief by my own father, you have to go back 8 years. When my biological mother passed away after a swift, brutal battle with illness, the warmth in our house died with her. She had been the heart of our family, but to my father, her death was simply an administrative change. Less than a year after we buried her, Judge Marsh introduced Victoria, a polished, razor-sharp socialite who viewed my family's legacy as her personal blank check. Along with Victoria came her 28-year-old son, Julian. Where Victoria operated with subtle, calculated manipulation, Julian was pure arrogance wrapped in tailored suits. Almost overnight, the home my mother had meticulously built was overhauled. Her portraits were taken down, her belongings cleared out, and her presence erased. But worse than the physical changes was the deliberate strategy Victoria implemented to push me out of my father's life entirely. Whenever I brought up my mother's estate, her private holdings, or the trust she had repeatedly promised was set aside for me, my father's demeanor would instantly harden. Victoria made sure to whisper sweet poison in his ear at every opportunity, framing my natural curiosity as greed and emotional instability. "Vivian is still unraveling from her grief, Arthur," she would softly tell him over dinner, loud enough for me to hear. "She's becoming obsessed with money she didn't earn." Gradually, Julian was ushered into the family business operations, given access to board meetings and legal advisories, while I was systematically pushed to the extreme margins of my own family. The isolation was deliberate, but it backfired on them. Being pushed out gave me the time and quiet space to look deeper into my mother's past. 4 months before my father's public retirement gala, I was in the attic going through a trunk of my mother's old belongings that Victoria had banished upstairs. Tucked deep inside the lining of her vintage jewelry armoire, my fingers hit a hard piece of metal. It was a brass key, accompanied by a faded bank receipt for a safety deposit box at First National Bank. When I brought that key to the bank, the manager unlocked a hidden chapter of my family's history. Inside the box were certified deeds to a private, highly lucrative commercial real estate portfolio, properties my mother had inherited independently from her side of the family long before she married my father. But as I flipped through the recent transaction ledgers, my blood ran cold. My father had been secretly managing these properties under an old, limited power of attorney, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars in rental income directly into accounts controlled by Victoria and Julian. I didn't rush to police. I confronted my father privately in his home study. I naively thought he would show remorse, but his reaction was pure ice. "You don't know what you're looking at, Vivian," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You mention this to anyone, and you will regret it." He realized in that exact moment that I had unraveled his secret theft. He knew if I went public, his pristine judicial career and Victoria's lavish lifestyle would crumble. So, he decided to strike first. Which brings us back to courtroom 4B, where my father was publicly executing his preemptive strike. The moment he held up those fabricated land transfer deeds, the room erupted in whispers. He didn't just want to disinherit me, he needed to discredit me completely before I could expose his embezzlement. Stepping up to the podium beside him was District Attorney Robert Hayes, my father's oldest golfing buddy. Robert adjusted his microphone and declared that his office was accelerating an indictment for felony forgery against me, right then and there. "We have indisputable proof," Robert boomed, waving the papers. "Vivian Marsh attempted to liquidate her father's assets by forging his signature on these deeds." I looked at the front row. Victoria was putting on a masterclass in feigned devastation, dramatically leaning into Julian's shoulder. Julian couldn't hide his smirk. They were exchanging victorious glances, absolutely certain they had won. Their strategy was brutally effective: humiliate me in front of the entire city's legal elite, terrify me with the immediate threat of prison, and force me into a panicked, rushed settlement where I would sign away any remaining rights to my mother's estate just to stay out of jail. They thought my spirit would break under the crushing weight of a room filled with 400 judging eyes. They thought a woman my age who had spent years being marginalized would simply crumble when confronted by the full, terrifying machinery of the local justice system led by a respected judge. They were waiting for me to cry, to beg, to loudly proclaim my innocence to a room that had already convicted me. But I didn't scream, and I didn't cry at all. My attorney, Marcus Vance, a quiet, gray-haired man who had been my mother's trusted legal counsel long before she married my father, stood up from our table. Without a word of drama, he unzipped his leather briefcase and pulled out a dusty vault folder bound in dark blue ribbon. He didn't raise his voice or address the media. He simply walked toward the bench and handed the sealed document directly to the presiding county clerk, requesting an immediate evidentiary review. The silence in courtroom 4B became heavy, thick with sudden anticipation. My father's confident posture stiffened slightly as he watched Marcus. That blue folder hadn't come from my father's house or any local file cabinet. It had been retrieved that very morning directly from the county clerk's official, tamper-proof sealed archives. My mother had placed it there 8 years ago, under a strict posthumous release clause. When the clerk unsealed the folder, the evidence inside shattered my father's entire narrative. It contained a certified, independent handwriting forensic audit, a notarized video log, and a formal affidavit recorded by my mother just weeks before her death. The documents proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the signature on those land transfers hadn't been forged by me at all. They were forged 3 years ago, by my father and Julian. They had used fraudulent power of attorney papers to secretly strip my mother's private trust, transfer the commercial properties into their own shell company, and set up a paper trail specifically designed to frame me if I ever discovered their theft. The terrifying silence in courtroom 4B was broken only by the hum of the gallery's large projection monitors as the clerk uploaded the contents of the vault file. Across 3 giant screens, the forensic handwriting comparison flashed for all 400 attendees to see. Clear, magnified high-resolution scans highlighted the exact, undeniable digital trace of Julian's distinct pen strokes overlaying my mother's stolen signature. Right beside it, the video recording played. My mother's frail yet incredibly clear voice echoed through the courtroom speakers, explicitly naming my father and Julian, warning that they were actively trying to steal her private inheritance. My father's face drained of every drop of color. The imposing, untouchable judge suddenly looked small, fragile, and utterly exposed. District Attorney Robert Hayes quietly stepped back from the podium, putting visible physical distance between himself and my father, realizing his career was about to burn down with the judges. In the front row, Victoria's fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by sheer panic, while Julian stared at the screens with his mouth slightly agape, his arrogant composure completely shattered. The presiding judge leaned over his bench, his eyes dark with outrage as he reviewed the certified forensic affidavit. Without hesitation, he struck down the fraudulent indictment against me, revoked my father's judicial immunity considerations on the spot, and ordered the bailiffs to secure the room. He directed the state police and federal inspectors present in the audience to immediately initiate a criminal fraud investigation against Arthur Marsh, Victoria, and Julian for perjury, grand larceny, and corporate embezzlement. The hunter had officially become the hunted. The aftermath was swift and uncompromising. Within 6 months, my father was stripped of his judicial title, forced to forfeit his pension, and faced severe criminal penalties alongside Julian for their financial schemes. Victoria, unable to maintain her lavish lifestyle, packed her bags and left before the trial even concluded. All of my mother's real estate holdings, along with millions in back pay rental income, were fully restored to her estate under my sole, undisputed management. I took those properties and created a non-profit foundation in my mother's honor, helping young women secure their financial independence and protect themselves from family exploitation. Standing on the steps of the courthouse on the day the final papers were settled, I looked up at the sky and finally felt a sense of complete peace. The scared, silenced daughter my father thought he could easily crush was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced down 400 hostile eyes, unraveled a web of powerful lies, and reclaimed her mother's legacy through truth and resilience. What would you have done if your own parent tried to ruin your life and brand you a criminal for money? Would you have fought back or walked away? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to click the next video showing on your screen for another unbelievable turn of events.